He is the Research Fellow for Regional Economics in the Center for Data Analysis. Now, we shortened it, never mind. He is the Chief Economist of the Heritage Foundation, E.J. Antoni. Come on up, E.J. And for 15 years, he's been waking up Philly. Now, it's the whole country. It's Chris Stigall, everybody.
Good evening, everybody. How you doing? Gotta get rid of that. Well, little music. I like that. We're gonna bring the house music down?
If we could kill the house music, please. Not that it's not lovely.
No, it's kind of, it's kind of chill. It's a chill vibe.
It works for this room, but...
So, we've done this now this is our third event. How many of you have been here for all three? Look at that. Look at that. How many of you, this is your first visit, your first time to Cigar Republic? Well, let me just say that our hosts are absolutely stellar. These guys have been friends of ours for years, and they have so appreciated your support, and we have so appreciated their support. And so before we go any further, I just wanted to welcome to the stage one of the brothers who makes this place run and makes it possible for us to be here and has continued to sponsor our event. Paul Scipione is his name. He's the CEO of Atlantic Cigars, and they run this place, the Cigar Republic. Paul, if you'd come up here for a second, please. Come on up. Big hand for Paul. 25 years in the game, and this guy has been at our side for a few years now, and we are so grateful for your friendship. You want to say anything to the people?
Thank you for coming. It's always a great time, and we really love hosting you guys, so God bless.
All right, little photo. Come here in the middle if you don't mind, Paul, and we'll, the obligatory, there we go. Ready?
Look at me, sorry, Paul. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Thanks so much, the Scipiones. Atlantic Cigar, everybody. You need stogies, grab them from them. You guys can get them online, right, Paul? People can shop online? Yeah, hope that you will. Now, also before we go any further, I want to thank a guy that has made the show hum for now 6 years we've been working together, and he is now the executive producer of the effort every single morning. He continues to be Fast Eddie Cayazzo.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. Ed mentioned it, and before we get started, I also wanted to say to each and every one of you that the last 6 years here and a few years before that, Philadelphia has been my home base. It's the longest that I've ever been on the air anywhere. And my family and I very, very much consider Philadelphia. While we're not originally Philadelphians, we very much consider this place our second home. And if you'd told me when we moved here in late 2010 that eventually we'd be doing a nationally syndicated show because of your support, I wouldn't have believed it. In fact, I wasn't even sure I was going to make it a year here when we moved in late 2010. But it is sincerely because you guys have been so good to us, my family, our radio station, our sponsors. You gave us the opportunity to take it national in January, and we just cannot thank you enough for your support. You guys are the reason we're here tonight. So thank you for coming. And by the way, do you like that it's a little smaller? We purposely engineered it so it's a little tinier. I do too, because I hope I got a chance to talk to each of you. I hope everybody got to speak with EJ. We'll be able to do so a little later. We're going to get to your questions. But anyway, I just wanted to say personally, off the top, thank you very much before we get into the meat and potatoes of the night. And so with that, there's a lot to get to. I guess I could start, EJ, with the Treasury Secretary coming out today and saying, Friday, we may get a vote on the big, beautiful bill. Yeah. And I loved the way Besant said it. He said, this president, in roughly a week or maybe a few weeks, is going to deliver potentially global peace. He's going to deliver permanent tax cuts. And before long, he's going to deliver on tariffs, too. That's quite a triad.
What a difference a president makes.
Right?
Right? Pretty incredible.
Amazing.
And
Yeah. Well, I would just ask you, let's start with the most obvious thing, the big, beautiful bill. As an economist at Heritage, by the way, and I know Eddie just mentioned this guy just got promoted to be the big dog economist at the Heritage Foundation, which is awesome. Congratulations. And his dad, Irv, is here tonight. How cool is that? Hi, Dad. Good to see you. So now we know who's going to be taking care of him in his old age. Yeah? Keep it up there. Yeah. So anyway, no, the big, beautiful bill, let's talk about that first. How critical is that to the economy, in your view?
Incredibly so. One of the analyses that I've seen in terms of how much inflation cost the American people under Joe Biden was about $4.5 trillion. So if you want to think, what would happen if the government were to raise taxes $4.5 trillion, you would get the cost of living crisis we have today. That's how much that inflation has robbed from the American people. If the Trump tax cuts are allowed to expire, which is what happens if we do nothing, you will see a tax increase of approximately $4.5 trillion, $4 trillion of which falls on the middle class. There is this huge misnomer that still persists to this day on crazy networks like CNN that the Trump tax cut was somehow a handout to the rich. You know, there is only one single cohort among the American people that actually paid more in taxes after the Trump tax cut. That was high income earners in high tax municipalities. So if you earn millions of dollars a year in a place like New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles, you ended up paying more. Because although your marginal tax rates got reduced, they wiped out a lot of your tax deductions, most especially the one for your state and local taxes. So the only people who ended up paying more were very high income earners in a very small number of counties around the country. So it's not an exaggeration to say this was a middle class tax cut. Again, 4 out of the $4.5 trillion belongs to the middle class. So if you allow all of these changes in the tax code to expire, it's going to be a $4 trillion tax increase on the middle class. So we can't allow that to happen. Okay, so the big, beautiful bill does solve that problem. Now, it's not perfect, okay? Believe me, it's not. It's got a lot of problems in it. The Senate did make a decent number of improvements on it, which thank God they did. Unfortunately, now the Senate parliamentarian is really axing a lot of that stuff out. Why on earth this woman is allowed to keep her job, I don't know. She was appointed by Harry Reid, of all people, years ago. And this is one of the things I just don't understand for the life of me about the Republicans in D.C. When the Democrats get in power, they just change everything so it's the way they want it. When Republicans get in power, they complain.
Thune, I read today, and I don't know how many of you heard about this parliamentarian, but she is, as he said, an appointee of Harry Reid, and she's gone in and she's surgically trying to pluck out some of the elements of this big, beautiful bill, saying that they need the bird rule. I don't want to get into a bunch of legislative stuff, but long story short, needing this simple majority versus a 60-vote majority.
Right.
There are rules that say, according to her, there are things in this bill that they're going to need 60 votes to pass. And so it's up to Thune, is my understanding, Thune, who runs the Senate now, will either have to remove those or fire the parliamentarian and hire his own parliamentarian.
Yes, please. And actually, so Thune can do it, obviously, you're absolutely right. But another interesting thing is so can J.D. Vance, because when you're the vice president of the United States, that also means you're the president of the Senate. And so he gets to make those changes too, if he so desires. Please, please, please.
Like in the next, but if they're truly thinking about voting on Friday, and today being Wednesday, is it? I don't know. Tuesday, sorry.
For a few more hours.
And I haven't even been drinking. So he's got like 2 days to fire and hire somebody new if they're having that vote and they want to keep it as is. Is that about right?
Exactly. Now, I'm not confident. As much as I love Scott Besson, I actually used to work for him briefly. Great guy. Brilliant guy. No one understands sovereign debt markets like he does. Thank God he's in the Treasury and not somebody else. I think he might be a little overly optimistic, though, with getting this thing across the finish line by the end of the week. It could still happen. Stranger things have happened in the world of politics, but I think it would be a stretch. Yeah.
So that's part one. Let's get into another, and I am going to get to every one of these questions, I promise, as long as I can read them. Which I've seen some of your writing, by the way. I can't promise that on all that. But I wonder about the tariffs. This is something that I have heard from. We had small business owners on the show. We have some truck drivers in the audience, I know. Tariffs are a source of real consternation for conservatives. I've heard from members of the audience who've been displeased with them, who say this hurts my business. I order a lot of my goods from China, and now, it's killing me. What is your overall before we get into kind of the intimate details of it, broadly speaking, do you like what Trump has done here, tariff-wise?
Broadly speaking, yes. On the details, it's been a very mixed bag, though. I have to be honest here. Look, I'm not here to defend the president. I'm not here to tear him down either, to be perfectly frank. I'm just here to tell you guys the truth, and that's it. From kind of a 30,000-foot view, tariffs in a vacuum are never a good idea, right? In a perfect world, there's no reason to ever introduce tariffs. That only makes things worse. But guess what? We don't live in that perfect world, right? Milton Friedman famously used to decry tariffs just constantly, and from the very academic framework that he approached the world, he's absolutely correct. Again, if you're gonna take that perfect world that you get in an academic setting and then impose tariffs on that, that's a very bad idea. But that's just not the world that we live in. And so there are a lot of reasons, whether economic or non-economic, like all the fentanyl coming across the border, there are a lot of reasons why it makes sense to impose tariffs, provided you do it in the right way. And I think it's that latter part where the Trump administration has been kind of hit or miss.
How important is it that you get European nations, China particularly, Canada, Mexico? My understanding is Trump's always been of the position, you knock off your tariffs, we'll knock off ours. I mean, it's always seemed fairly straightforward. I understand what you mean, and I think in a perfect world, there would be none. True free trade means no tariffs. Is that right? Is that overly simple?
Right. No, it's exactly right. And that's why the biggest free trade zone in the world is here. It's the United States. States don't have to pay tariffs when we import and export stuff across our borders.
Although there was a great debate about that during our founding, was there not?
That's exactly right, yeah. There was literally a clause that had to be inserted in the Constitution to cover that.
Yeah.
Again...
So can you explain to me politically, this is what I've never understood, why are there Republicans, conservatives, whatever you want to call them, who seem okay with that dynamic? I totally understand why tariffs are not optimal and you don't want them, but it makes complete sense to me if China's going to soak us for selling things to them, or you can't even buy an American car in Germany because it's too expensive. Why in the world should we tolerate that? Why is that a conservative principle?
I think it's because for a very long time, the Republican Party was actually, they were staunch proponents of tariffs. They were all about protecting American industry from essentially from two things. One, sometimes it was protecting from legitimate competition. That was not good. But sometimes it was trying to protect from countries like Great Britain dumping industrial products into northern cities, so that there was no way, manufacturers in places like Philadelphia, like Boston, like New York could compete. So, and this is going back to the post-Civil War era, right? That really gets ingrained into conservative thinking and into the Republican Party. But as the decades go on, and we really become the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, there's no reason to have protectionism. It kind of vanishes from the American mindset, so to speak. Not the rest of the world, but from the American mindset. Then when we get into the post-war era, so 46 and beyond, now the calculus changes completely. Now we actually are happy to see countries like Germany and Japan impose tariffs on us because we're trying to rebuild them to make them resilient against communism.
So it was sort of a noble effort at first that is now costing us dearly.
Exactly. And you have to wonder...
Much like arming Afghanistan or anything else we start doing with a noble idea that ends up biting us.
Yeah, literally anything we do in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're really having to wrestle with today is why is it, to your point, Chris, that Chevrolet and Ford can't sell cars in Germany, even though they can produce them much cheaper than Mercedes or BMW or Audi, right? Why is it that the tariffs that were put in place to help German industry rebuild in 46 are still in place today? That makes absolutely no sense. There is no reason why we need to be shielding the Japanese and the German automotive markets from competition. It makes absolutely no sense.
It's as well explained as I've ever heard it. And Trump's decided I'm going to be the one to do the hard things. Is it basically just inertia? Former presidents who might even agree with what you just said, it's too hard, let's not upset the apple cart, and Trump's just doing the hard stuff? Is that what we're watching?
That's a big part of it. The other thing that has happened, and this has really been a phenomenon of the last maybe 30 years, but maybe only 20, 25 years, has been the growth of multinational corporations. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I love multinationals. But as those companies got increasingly dependent on things like the very cheap labor in China and the subsidies that the Chinese government gives them for building factories there, they essentially made sure to only donate to Republicans, not just any Republicans, but Republicans who would support zero tariff policies. And so the Republican Party increasingly has become a place where people are willing to tolerate tariffs on American products, but not any tariffs on foreign products. And that is something that President Trump is adamant about changing, because that has helped to hollow out the American industrial base. That has been one of the things that has helped create the Rust Belt. Now, it's not the only thing. In fact, it's not even the predominant thing, to be really frank. What has primarily turned the industrial belt into the Rust Belt has been the overtaxation and the overregulation and things like forced union laws in places like Pittsburgh, like Chicago, like Milwaukee. If you go across the Rust Belt, where is it? It's blue state America. They haven't just lost manufacturing jobs to China. They have, but they've also lost them to Texas, to Tennessee, to the Carolinas. In other words, the manufacturers are going where they're treated well, where they're not being taxed to death, where they're not being regulated to death. Primarily, what created the Rust Belt was a self-inflicted wound.
So here's what I hear today. I hear people say it is unrealistic to try to drag manufacturing jobs back here, even if you're successful in getting a factory built in Norristown. You're not going to find people to work that factory, which will lead me into the next question, and that is Trump's crackdown on illegals, millions of illegals. And I am now reading pretty regularly in the Wall Street Journal, gosh, things would be better if Trump wasn't rounding up all the illegals. So that's becoming a new theme, that the economy can't function unless we have lots of illegal labor, and Trump is upsetting that apple cart too. So how true is that? And I think even the Fed chair said that today in congressional testimony. Well, if you're going to round up all the migrants, we're not going to have an economy. Do you subscribe to that?
Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, who is always wrong but never in doubt. Right? Inflation is transitory. Do we all remember that one? Right?
Yeah.
This is the guy, and we forget, it's not as if his mistakes simply started when Biden became president. One of the biggest mistakes Trump made during his first term was elevating him from being a member of the Board of Governors at the Federal Reserve to being Fed chair. And we forget because it happened before COVID, but he was actually hiking rates for the first couple of years of Trump's term, really basically almost up until COVID. And he over-tightened monetary policy so much and pushed rates way too high that for about a week there, the Fed, who's in charge of setting interest rates, actually lost control of interest rates. And this went completely under the radar, again, partially because of COVID. But at the end of 2019, they had messed up something called the repurchase agreement market. They had messed up this part of the financial plumbing so bad that hedge funds were collapsing, and they had to conduct a $500 billion bailout of leveraged hedge funds. Does anybody ever remember seeing that in the news? Because that happened. Started in September, went until about December of 2019. So he has been making mistakes his entire time at the Fed. I don't know of any instance where he ever made the right call. And then obviously with Biden, he kept rates way too low for way too long. So why anyone believes anything he has to say is beyond me. But to your question, though, sorry, I'm off my soapbox now. How on earth did the economy function before Biden let in all those illegals? Right? Because if we listen to all the people saying this is catastrophic, Trump is deporting all these illegals, okay, so he's simply going to just kind of hit the reset button and put us back to where we were before when things were fine? I mean, when we had the greatest housing boom in this nation's history, which actually wasn't the early 2000s, although that was a housing boom, but the greatest housing boom we ever saw was in the 50s and 60s. How much illegal immigration did we have then? Here's a hint. We actually had a closed border policy for part of that period where we weren't taking any immigrants, legal or illegal. I mean, Eisenhower launched one of the biggest deportation campaigns our nation has ever seen. So this idea that somehow we won't have anyone to work manufacturing or construction if we get rid of these folks, I just don't buy it. The record of history doesn't support that. And furthermore, I think we really overestimate just how many of these folks are actually working. I mean, California has been defying federal law to do this, but they've still been doing it. They hand out social security numbers, driver's licenses, the whole 9 yards to these folks, and they get them on welfare. Why would they be on welfare if they were actually out there, building homes or building roads or whatever the case may be?
So just to be clear, I think it's true. I just don't think it's avoidable. We have to acknowledge that there are probably many employers, many people in this country who are hiring people who are not legal citizens.
Sure.
Can't prove they're legal, probably being paid pennies on the dollar. I find that pretty gross and unfortunate. I think that's taking advantage of people. I do. I don't like that at all. I don't know how you crack down on that. And if you do, does that force someone, a home builder, I don't know, a hotel owner who's hiring illegal labor and paying them little? You take that away from them, does that make a house more expensive, a hotel room more expensive because you've got to pay an American citizen exorbitantly more to go out, pick the berries, build the houses, clean the rooms? Economically speaking, how do you course correct? Does it force American business to spend more to get Americans to do that work?
Oh, initially, sure. Absolutely. But one of the things that we have found is that as labor costs go up in an economy, it always prompts investment in capital. In other words, think of it as somebody putting a car together on an assembly line and they're doing it by hand. They're not very efficient, right? It's going to take them a long time to put an engine together or to put the frame together, et cetera, because they're doing it all with hand tools. But now give that guy a pneumatic wrench or whatever other kind of power tool you want. He's going to be so much more efficient and he's going to be more productive. And ultimately, it's always productivity that justifies somebody's wage. And so as you start to see labor costs go up, it prompts employers to invest more in capital. And there's kind of this misnomer in economics that if you invest more in capital, you get a better return on capital investment. You actually get a better return on labor. Likewise, if you invest in labor, you get a better return on capital. Think of it this way. If I give you some really fancy software that you can use to perform whatever task, but you don't know how to operate it because you don't have the human capital, you don't have the training to operate that software, how productive is it to add that software to the company? It's not. But now add the human capital, add that training, the education, whatever the case may be, all of a sudden your return on the capital investment is what goes up. So there's this interplay between human capital and investment, and part of the reason why we have seen such a really a dearth of capital investment in this country for, I mean, it's been bad under Biden, but it's been bad for at least a decade, has been the fact that we overeducate folks. In other words, we tell everybody you got to go to college. And most folks, this is not a knock on those folks, but college just isn't for them, right? We've somehow made the trades a dirty thing in this country, which is terrible, because you can make a great living as a carpenter, as a plumber, as a mechanic, as a welder, you name it. But because we've overinvested on the education side of things, specifically areas of education that aren't really productive. Like, I'm sorry, a gender studies degree doesn't qualify you to do literally anything but complain, right? So at the end of the day, you've seen a complete imbalance between the capital investment and the human investment. And I think we underestimate, sorry, I know I'm on the soapbox again, but this has a point. I think we underestimate just how much, how many problems that overemphasis on education has been in terms of return on investment for people's wages. We would have been much better off, instead of wasting all this money on the education state, putting that into capital investment, because that would have allowed those workers to command a higher wage, as opposed to graduating with a 4-year degree that ends in the word studies that no one cares about, and you're basically starting your working life with a mortgage because of your student debt.
I don't want to misrepresent them, but if memory serves, people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, I think, if memory serves, were both of the opinion, I think, and I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting this, but my memory was, they both said, we can't have the technical revolution in this country, the IT revolution, the AI revolution in this country, unless we're importing people. We just don't have the brain power in this country for that's necessary. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think that's anything new in American history, though. Like, this has historically been the place where the world's best and the brightest come, right? I mean, it's not, America was never really a place where you saw massive, constant influxes of low skill or unskilled labor, because you could make just as good a living here without a skill set as you could in Eastern Europe or North Africa or wherever else, right? There was no advantage to that. But if you're an entrepreneur, if you're somebody who has intellectual property, if you're somebody who wants to start a business, any of the kinds of economic activities that are ultimately going to be heavily taxed and that the state is going to try to take from you, which has historically been the case for most of the world, this was always your safe haven from that. And so that's why all the world's inventors came here. That's why the great thinkers came here, whether they were, thinkers from the standpoint of philosophy or people inventing, the steam engine, the assembly line, you name it. So what's the kind of, what's the modern corollary? It's AI, right? It's the digital age. And so I think it's actually a good thing if we continue importing the best and the brightest and the hardest working people here. The only thing we want to avoid is importing a bunch of people who are going to end up on welfare, which is what we've done the last 4 years.
Let's go AI then for a minute. Steve Moore was just on the show this morning. Steve said he's investing in a company that can build houses robotically. This is a great fear of many people, and I have heard white-collar jobs, as much as 40% of white-collar jobs, never mind labor jobs, in the next few years could be replaced with AI. What does that mean for this economy then, and what does it mean for millions of people who held a job that suddenly lose it? Will there be enough work for all of us if AI is kicking a lot of us to the curb?
Great question. One of the things I love about the AI revolution we're seeing right now is the fact that for the first time, we have a technological revolution that is not gunning for blue-collar jobs. It's gunning for white-collar jobs. AI is not going to, affect the guy who's coming to your house because your water heater's leaking, right? AI is not going to be able to, to solder those pipes together for you, or whatever the case may be. And so I think it's forcing a lot of people to rethink their thoughts on what we call creative destruction, which is just a fancy way of saying a new invention comes along and it creates a whole new industry, but it wipes out another one.
Can you give an example of that historically?
Oh, sure. You know, when Henry Ford revolutionizes automotive production, because he doesn't invent the automobile, it's been around for a while, right? But what he does is he reinvents the production process in such a way that it's so cheap to produce that he can sell it to the common man. And the consequence of that is he completely wipes out the horse and buggy industry very, very quickly. But what's interesting is that because people are spending so much less on transportation than they used to, they now have more money left over to buy other things. And so the total number of jobs that get created, not just in Ford's factories, but in other industries who see a surge in consumer spending, actually was greater than the loss of jobs in the horse and buggy industry. And we can expect, I think, the exact same thing from AI or construction, where robots are now going to be building houses. We forget, because we have this Keynesian fallacy called aggregate demand. How many people have heard of that? Yeah. A handful of people.
So smart. Show-offs. Smartest audience, that's exactly right. Damn straight.
So aggregate demand is basically a fallacy. This idea that there's somehow a sum total of all of our needs and wants. We have infinite needs and wants. This is the whole reason the field of economics even exists.
So you're saying, may I just dumb that down for me? Mm-hmm. You're saying that there will always be, you believe the economy will always create a new division of work if an old division of work is wiped out.
Exactly.
That's never not been true.
Exactly. We have unlimited wants and needs. And so as soon as one thing goes away, something else will pop up. And it doesn't have to be a one-to-one replacement like it was for the car and the horse and buggy, right? Obviously, you're just substituting one kind of transportation for another. But again, the other thing that happened was people spent so much less on transportation that they now had money left over to buy other things. Now they could buy radios, for example. I mean, things that previously were only the purview of the very, very rich. All of a sudden, people had disposable income and they could afford to buy these things.
And so when that disposable income pours into another portion of the economy, that grows that portion of the economy, creating more demand, more jobs, more capital.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so at the end of the day, we have yet to see an invention, not just in American history, but really world history. But let's stick to America, I guess. You've yet to see an invention in American history that actually was a net job destroyer. They have always been net job creators.
Can I just from a show of hands, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but I'm just curious, how many of you are, rather than I ask it a negative way, I'll ask it a positive way. How many of you are excited, bullish, feeling positive about AI? You're feeling positive about it, yeah. How many of you have trepidation about it or concerned about it? Yeah, I mean, little half and half-ish, maybe not quite. 2/3 of the room is bullish. So you're bullish, it sounds like, on AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Not the least of which reason is the fact that it's all about energy. And we are, right now, as we go through this AI revolution, we have a guy at the helm who is all about producing more domestic energy. I mean, what an absolute win-win.
And by the way, talking about AI and energy, it needs it big.
Yes.
And isn't it amazing that now we're having a conversation about onlining nuclear power plants because we so desperately need energy for AI.
Right. And that is such a phenomenal pairing, by the way. So unlike nat gas and to a lesser extent coal, nat gas can ramp up and down in terms of production capacity very, very quickly. I mean, you literally have an operator who can turn a dial at a natural gas power plant and within seconds change the power output of that plant. It's really remarkable, what they call dispatchable power. Nuclear is exactly the opposite. Nuclear only operates efficiently at a very specific heat output or megawatt output. And so you want to pair nuclear power with a power draw that also draws very, very consistently. And there's two great matches for that. One is mining of things like Bitcoin, because that is a very steady power draw, but the other is AI, right? Things like, running the air conditioning in this beautiful establishment, that's not a very good match. Why? Because the demand is really high during certain parts of the day, and then it falls off at night. But again, as you start bringing these new technologies like AI online, bringing back nuclear is a perfect match for that.
And isn't it a disaster to be going backwards with the idea that solar and wind and alternative energy at a time we've never consumed more power? It's a train wreck, the whole notion that we would do away with nuclear and coal and natural gas and fossil fuels. You can't possibly meet the demand of what's coming with solar and wind.
Exactly. And both of those, they're non-dispatchable. They simply produce power when the environment dictates. There is no way an operator can decide, okay, let's produce more or let's produce less. You're literally at the whim of Mother Nature. And it's not even just a matter of it's a bad fit for technologies like Bitcoin or AI. It's just a bad fit for human lifestyle. And forget the fact that these things are net losers over their lifetime. People don't realize this, but things like wind and solar are so heavily subsidized by the government that if you take those subsidies away, they actually lose money over the lifetime of those installations. I mean, it's mind-blowing, Chris, how difficult it is, for example, to recycle a solar panel or the maintenance that's required on a wind turbine. I mean, it's absolutely obscene from a cost perspective.
Let's pivot to Operation Midnight Hammer. How about that, huh? I heard from a lot of people, oh boy, here goes the oil market. Here goes the oil market. I just saw a stat today. A barrel of gas when Trump was inaugurated was $77. Today, it's $64. The markets all closed up. I think I heard NASDAQ closed for 500 up today or something like that.
Record high, yeah.
So a record high close for the markets, and oil is dropping. That is the antithesis of everything I heard after he dropped the hammer on Iran. What happened?
I got to say, I was surprised. I really thought we were going to see, well, number one, I did not think we were going to see a peace deal this quickly, right? I did not think we were going to see a ceasefire this quickly. I thought there were much better odds the Strait of Hormuz might get closed. So I was very surprised by the moves in oil. In the same way that I've been very surprised how quickly the president has gotten a handle on inflation. I thought it was going to take him at least a few more months, but pleasantly surprised. Look, the president is truly remarkable in his ability to, I think, wield the minimum amount of force necessary to get his message across. He has been incredibly judicious in when and where he wants to display American dominance. And part of the reason why that is so important is that if you just do this willy-nilly, then nobody trusts you, right? I mean, if you look at what happened under Obama, no one dropped more bombs than President Obama did. I mean, it's no exaggeration. He dropped bombs on more days than any other president in American history, including FDR and Truman combined, who were the presidents for World War II and, part of the Cold War conflict as well. So, I mean, it's absolutely astonishing. Again, a limited but forceful display of American might was all that was needed. What a difference a president makes.
And what makes the markets react so positively? Can you guess or can you know? I mean, do you have any idea why the markets seem to like this instead of panic?
I think it's because what the president did allowed both Israel and Iran to save face. So if we look at what happened over the last, basically, 10, 11, maybe 12 days, what's changed? I mean, not much, really. Iran still has all their fissile material. I wish they didn't, but they do. We've probably set their nuclear program back many, many months if they were to try to restart it today, but I have my doubts they're going to actually try. So it's like we just kind of hit a reset button, but we haven't actually changed much overall. Whereas markets were really, from the moment Israel started attacking Iran, markets were really pricing in a pretty big disaster, which the president has miraculously avoided.
Let me go the route that maybe some in this audience feel, and we're mindful of. You mentioned Eisenhower earlier, the military-industrial complex. The business of war is good for business. The economy roars when we go to war, that kind of thing. Where are you with that? Is there truth to that? I don't believe that's the case with Donald Trump. I think a credible argument now, years later, could be made maybe that we got ourselves entangled into these meat grinder situations over time, maybe for monetary reasons, but that's not why you're here. But how about the business of war for the economy?
Would you rather we spent $1 trillion on the war in Iraq or $1 trillion building new roads, highways, hospitals, and other infrastructure here in the United States? So you're going to spend $1 trillion either way. But in the one instance, you basically flush it down the toilet. And in the other instance, you actually create economic activity that will create future economic activity, right? Let's say we spend $1 trillion upgrading all of our interstates in this country. Okay, what does that do in the long run? Well, all new roadways means it's going to take us a while before we actually have to replace those roads again, so saving on some maintenance costs. We're going to save commuters because they're going to have an easier drive now with an expanded highway system. We're saving fuel costs. We're saving people's time, right? There are a whole host of different ways in which you could have spent that money in a productive manner instead of a completely unproductive manner. Hence the saying, wars only destroy. And I say this as somebody who has 3 siblings who work for defense contractors. I am not a fan of war. It does not help the economy. It does not help the American people. Art Laffer, who I've known for many years now, last year, maybe the year before, he and Brian Dimitrovic, the two of them, wrote a great book called Taxes Have Consequences. And one of the things they go through in World War II was how GDP just absolutely explodes because the government's spending so much money, and we count that government spending in GDP. But if you look at the portion of GDP that actually counts, which is what can the American consumer buy, that didn't go up in World War II, it went down. This is part of the reason why it's really a fiction to say, not just that the New Deal ended the Great Depression, but that World War II ended the Great Depression. Not from the American consumer standpoint. From their standpoint, they could buy less then than they could at almost any other period during the Great Depression. You had price controls, you had rationing. It was an absolutely horrific period for the American consumer.
Last question for me, then I'm going to get to these. And that is interest rates. I know what you said about Jerome Powell. He seems, Trump is very, very clear that he's being a hard-headed buffoon. He's too late, Jerome Powell and all of that. Are interest rates going to drop? Because here's what I know when we talk about housing, and I've talked about this with Steve. People that are in homes with 2 and 3% interest rates have no interest in selling those houses and getting into 6 and 7% interest rates for new ones. So everybody is just kind of stopped, in my view, and it's largely because of interest rates. Does he see that? Does he recognize that? Will his hand be forced on interest rates, or are we going to be stuck where we are for a while, in your view?
I think we're probably stuck for a while in large part because he has so much animosity for the president, some of which is probably deserved, honestly, if you look at his tweets. But, look, you do yourself no favors when you call the guy an idiot and everything else almost every single day. But whatever the case, he's done a terrible job managing the Fed. And one of the interesting things now we're seeing, especially just literally the last couple of days with different pieces of data on the housing market that have come out, is we're actually seeing the supply of homes for sale go through the roof. It's absolutely exploding, but here's the kicker. You mentioned those people who have like 2.5% mortgages, Chris, and they're facing a market in a lot of places where mortgage rates are still 8 or 9% in many markets. So the only way they're willing to sell in that instance, because you lose your mortgage when you sell the house, is if they sell the house for such a large premium that they now have a massive down payment on the next house, so they don't actually have to borrow that much, and now it's not that painful to pay 8% because it's on a relatively small mortgage, right? So we've seen a huge increase, especially recently, in the amount of homes that are for sale, but they're for sale for extremely high prices because that's the only way those folks can get out of their mortgage. So unfortunately, I don't think, even if they were to cut by, let's say, 100 or 200 basis points, so that's 1 or 2 percentage points, it's not going to really fix the problem. It helps a little bit, but unless you're going to get interest rates back down to like 3% on mortgages, which is going to be tough to do, you're really not going to fix that problem, in part because the other dynamic that you have to worry about, and this has traditionally been true for the housing market, is every time rates go down, people borrow more. Because at the end of the day, when I go to buy a house, my primary concern actually isn't the price. It's the monthly mortgage payment, because that's what I have to fit into my monthly budget. Obviously, that's a function in part of the home price, but also chiefly the interest rate. So you're in a situation today where as the interest rate comes down, you will have folks who can then say, oh, now I can borrow more and still maintain that monthly payment I wanted. And so you're going to have both of those. Forces moving in opposite directions. So again, until you get interest rates on mortgages back down to maybe 4%, you're going to probably be stuck with this frozen housing market.
I'm just baffled as my young children, who are now 20, 19, apartments. They're building apartments everywhere as fast as they can for like mortgage payment rents.
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
2-bedroom apartments for $3,000 aren't far down the road from here,
Right.
brand new. I mean, it's more than my mortgage for a home, and they're building apartment buildings as fast as they can. What's that dynamic? How are people affording that?
It goes back to housing. So all of these people who ordinarily would have been buying houses can't. They've been priced out of the market. We have never seen home prices, and not just home prices, but interest rates and home prices like this. And we have never seen it where you have home prices this high relative to incomes. Because those, I know a lot of people in this room remember the early 1980s when mortgage rates were not just double digits, but were 20%. And you look at today's housing market and you say, kids these days complaining about 8%. Yeah, they're complaining about 8% because home prices were never this high relative to incomes. So homes today, think of it this way, the median price home today, and you couple that with the median income, it's less affordable today than it was in the early 80s. That's how bad it is. So all of these people who, getting back to your question, Chris, who would normally have been in the housing market trying to buy a home, they've been priced out, so now they're all renting. So you've seen this huge surge in the demand for apartments. Well, Econ 101 here, what happens when you increase demand? You increase price. And at the same time, the construction costs have gotten so high for building today that it has really eaten into home builders' margins. And so the only kind of apartments today that are profitable, not in all markets, but in a lot of them, are luxury ones. And so the regular apartments have basically kind of gone by the wayside.
And so all of us that are sitting on homes with some equity, all of us that are thinking, maybe in the next few years I'm going to sell and cash out, baby. I mean, what you're describing doesn't sound sustainable long term. Could we see? I don't want to go fatalist here, but are you talking about a necessary correction where people start losing real value in what they see on paper right now for their homes?
Oh goodness. Well, if we're going to talk real value versus nominal value, one of the things we got to remember anytime we talk about what stuff is selling for today versus what it sold for, 5 years ago, 25% of the increase has just been inflation. So think of it, if you own a stock today that you bought 5 years ago and it's gone up by 25%, congratulations, that was literally just inflation, right? I mean, people who people who did the Roth versus the 401k have really made out like bandits right now, because people who put in money tax deferred into retirement accounts, or people who even if it wasn't a retirement account, maybe it wasn't even equities, it could have been property. You go to sell these different assets, you're going to get crushed with capital gains, right? And they're not capital gains on an increase in real value. It's just an increase in nominal value. I literally just on Friday, I think, I ran the numbers for household net wealth in this country, and 90% of the increase in household net wealth from the beginning of 2021 until the beginning of 2025, so essentially the Biden administration, 90% of that increase was literally just inflation. Only 10% of that increase, which accumulated almost exclusively to the top 4 or 5%, it was, everything else was just inflation. Only 10% was actually a real increase. And so, I really want to encourage people, when you're looking at what's my home going to sell for today, keep that in mind. A lot of the increase that you're seeing on paper is just that, on paper.
So then it would be imprudent for us to look at our home values today and assume 10 years from now that's what we're going to get when we sell it.
I don't want to go that far. It's just a matter of, I think we need to be really, really mindful that whether it's a home or a stock or whatever else, the cost of a car, as so many of these things go up in price, that's different from going up in value.
Yeah.
I just had to buy a new car literally just a couple of weeks ago. And obviously you have sticker shock when you look at cars today.
Yeah, but you're making that heritage money now.
Oh, stop it. We're a nonprofit. At the end of the day, please don't confuse an increase in price with an increase in value. So much of what we've been looking at is literally just an increase in price. And look, I have a pretty high level of confidence that 10 years from now, homes are going to be selling for more than they're selling for today.
Wow.
But they're selling for more dollars that are losing value.
You feeling smarter tonight, by the way? How about this? You enjoying it? Well, I've never done one like this before. I like this. It's cigars and academics. I feel very good about it. I hope you guys are enjoying it. All right, let's turn to some of your questions. How realistic is it for Trump to cut income tax for anyone earning less than $200,000? How realistic is it for Trump to cut income tax for anyone earning less than $200,000? And while you answer that, I'm going to do something I've never done in my career. Take a restroom break. EJ, answer that question. I'll be right back.
I think it's extremely likely, and that's my answer. Okay, Chris, we're ready for the next question. And I'll tell you why. I can give you a couple of examples, both of which are in the big beautiful bill. The first is no tax on tips. If you're looking at, number one, if you're looking at people who make tipped income, by the way, remember to tip your waitresses and bartenders. If you're looking at people who make tipped income, they primarily are going to be people who fall into this income category, right? On top of that, once you actually read through the text of the bill, which I, as penance for my many sins, have had to do, you find that there are actually built into the bill provisions that say, okay, once somebody makes over this certain threshold of income, this doesn't apply to them. In other words, you don't get to have Morgan Stanley converting their CEO's salary to $1 with the rest of it just being a tip, right, to try to circumvent income taxes. The other thing is that they have put in huge cuts for folks who are receiving Social Security. Now, because of the mechanics of the legislation and different parliamentary rules, they're not able to actually get rid of the tax on Social Security income itself. But what they were able to do was to essentially give those retirees a larger exemption. In other words, they basically said, okay, the first X number of dollars on your tax return are not going to be subject to income tax. Coincidentally, it's what a lot of retirees receive in Social Security income each year. So it was not quite exactly the same thing as saying we're no longer going to tax Social Security income, but it ends up having exactly the same effect. And sure enough, retirees are not a group of people who are typically raking it in, at least not with earned income, right? This is another group of people who are going to fall into this income bracket that the question asked about.
Excellent timing. Thank you. You know, all of you have been very, very nice talking about my weight loss. One of the keys to it is drinking a lot of water. Whew. I have been. You're welcome, Dr. Ashley Lucas, PhD weight loss, yeah. All right. I'll have to watch the videotape later. I'm sure the answer was excellent, but I missed every bit of it. Was it good? Was it a good answer? Okay, good. How is, this one's, I'm sorry, I guess this one's for me. I'll put that one aside. I'll answer that, though, in a minute. Now that the files have been declassified, tell us who was the second gunman on the grassy knoll. Smart ass. Thoughts? I'm going to find one for you here soon, EJ. Got some comics in the audience tonight.
Maybe I should go take a bathroom break.
Maybe you should. All right, thoughts on the jobs report. They appear to be very volatile, where substantial adjustments are made monthly. As an economist, do you think data collection and reporting has become politicized?
Good question. So let's go back to spring of 2022. That's when we first saw a lot of our job market statistics start to show some really, really weird patterns. And that's not unheard of. It has happened before. But in the past, whenever we saw the data start to do really weird things that we couldn't easily explain, and things that we then later learned were wrong as better and better data became available, those things were always fixed. And what was really weird under the Biden administration was that nobody in the Labor Department, specifically the Bureau of Labor Statistics, did anything to fix these problems, even after we were sounding the alarm bells for several years. So one of the things that happened was the monthly job reports began perpetually overstating the number of jobs, which again, it's not uncommon that you have one job report that slightly overestimates the number of jobs, and then the next month it underestimates, and it goes back and forth, and then at the end of the year it essentially just averages out to zero. That's perfectly normal. I mean, it's really hard to get a sense of exactly how many jobs there are in an economy of 330 million people, especially when you're essentially surveying every month less than 200,000 businesses, and then from that you're trying to extrapolate as to how many payrolls we have in the whole country. That's tough to do, and you're going to miss. Sometimes you're going to miss up, sometimes you're going to miss down. Again, it should average out to zero, but it wasn't. And what we found as we do a little bit more research on this is that the economy has really changed in a lot of ways after the pandemic. I can give you just one example. Increasingly, when people start a new business, they're not able to actually get that business off the ground. In other words, it starts, it survives for a couple months, and then they close shop. It just doesn't work. And even among the ones that are able to make it, increasingly, they don't ever grow. Like it starts as a sole proprietorship, and it just stays that way. They're never really able to get it off the ground from a growth standpoint. Maybe it's big enough that it can support a single person, right? Provide for a single income, but that's it. Well, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics is looking at the number of businesses that are being created and destroyed every month, they're having to estimate how many jobs are being created and lost as the number of businesses change. Well, the models that they used to use and that worked perfectly well in 2019, perfectly well, are complete junk today. And so I think it's been kind of a sin of omission, if you will, that the Bureau of Labor Statistics knew all of these problems began in the spring of 22. I and many others were trying to sound the alarm about it, and they spent, now it's been 3 years, right? And they have done absolutely nothing to fix these problems. And so now, even today under Trump, when we get these jobs numbers, we continue to see them revised down later. And actually, the Federal Reserve Branch right here in Philadelphia, they put out a quarterly estimate where they look at, thank you very much, where they look at the number of jobs that have been allegedly created And then they look at more recent data, more comprehensive data, and try to estimate how are those numbers eventually going to have to be revised? Well, guess what? In the fourth quarter of last year, they think we basically created no jobs in the economy. During a time when the Biden administration was telling us, oh yeah, we added 600 or 700,000 jobs. No, we probably didn't create any. And again, it's really, really troubling.
And by the way, I read a report that says so many of the jobs that were being counted were government jobs,
Yes,
government-created jobs
exactly.
that have since vanished because Trump has sliced quite a bit of those.
Exactly, 100%. That has been a disproportionate number of the job gains. In fact, for basically the last, not quite 2 years, it's something like 20 months. It's kind of an odd time frame, but for the last 20 months or so of the Biden administration, something like half of all the jobs that were created were government jobs.
And this is something,
it's insane.
I've been so sensitive about this on the show because I'm sure there are some of you in this audience. I don't know, but I never want to be insensitive. You want another scotch, by the way? How you doing? You want another scotch? Can we give the man another scotch? I said the greatest setup to a joke is a drunk economist walked into a bar.
Everyone else walks out.
That's right. Thank you, buddy. So the government job thing, I try not to be, I never want to make anybody feel bad because they work for government, but gosh, there are so many people that are earning a paycheck because of taxpayers, and that just...
Right.
It's not a sustainable model that we would continue to employ people with taxpayer dollars. It's not a fault of anybody that has a government job. I don't mean to speak ill of them, but right, that's not a sustainable model.
No, it's not at all. Although some of these people do absolutely deserve to be fired. I can give you one example. This was back in March, I think it was. I had to go in. I was actually going in to meet with Scott Besson and his folks at the Treasury, and I'm hopping in an Uber to go across D.C. And I'm just chatting with the driver for a few minutes, and he's telling me how he's like, yeah, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do this. I'm like, do what, like Uber? He goes, yeah. He goes, I have another job, and they're making us all go back to work, so we're going to have to be in the office during the day now. And I'm like, oh, where do you work? Commerce Department.
Unbelievable.
And I thought to myself, no tip.
Yeah, huh?
Like, I am paying your salary right now with my tax dollars, and you're double dipping.
This is one of those things too that makes people mad at me, and I'm not picking on you if this is what you. Okay, don't get mad at me. I'm just asking. The at-home work thing. The economy has shifted hard to that. People doing their work from home, and I know there were a lot of people doing that before COVID. I am convinced till my dying day, COVID hijacked and forever altered and monkeyed with this economy in a way I still don't think we fully understand,
Yes.
and maybe we will never fully recover from. Am I right or am I wrong?
It has been so unbelievably detrimental, and it's really sad. It's going to take us, another 15 years before we finally get it out of our system, so to speak, because essentially all of the kids who were in school during this time, almost all of them lost at least a year of education. As we look at their testing scores, they are literally testing a year behind what kids were doing in 2019. And what's really insane is Eddie, thank you
Thanks,
so
Ed.
much. Like the best executive producer ever right here.
It's a really good thing I quit drinking, or we'd have a hell of a show right now.
So, and then it gets even worse if you go to states where the governors purposely kept the economy shut down for a really long period of time. And, states like Illinois or California, I mean, those kids basically lost 2 whole years of school because they learned nothing with the whole remote learning garbage. So, okay, you fast forward to today, you have kids who have been graduating, right, since 2021. And what we're finding increasingly is their productivity is horrific in the workforce. I mean, the aggregate labor productivity numbers that we've been seeing over the last several years have had some of the worst growth rates in American history. And we've been keeping track of this since 48. So we have a pretty good sample there, right? And part of the problem is that not only do a lot of these young folks did they miss out on education in school. But now they go into the workforce, and they're facing a workforce where a lot of their older counterparts aren't there. They're working from home. And so the very folks whom they should be learning from aren't there to teach them anything. And it has been so unbelievably detrimental. An economist I work with a lot, Casey Mulligan, he's a professor at the University of Chicago right now. He will hopefully be confirmed as the essentially deregulatory czar for the administration, hopefully in the coming weeks or months. But he's put some estimates together that this is costing us the equivalent of hundreds of millions of man hours a year because of the lower productivity that we have today, that all stems from the horrific public policy decisions that we made during COVID.
It will haunt me forever. I don't know about the rest of you, but it just haunts me. COVID haunts me forever. What will the short and long-term impacts of the tariff agreements that Trump's negotiated, international tariff agreements, short and long-term impacts? Are you bullish ultimately on where Trump takes the tariff? We kind of talked about this a bit ago. If China really is about to do a deal, it sounds like they are. EU has said they will. Trump said, okay, I'll give you 90 days. We got to be closing in on that. Let's go EU, China, Japan, maybe Canada, Mexico. I mean, are we talking about meaningful economic change?
Honestly, right now, it seems very minimal. Beneficial, but still minimal. When I look at, for example, the China deal, at least what's been presented, who knows what's going on behind closed doors. Obviously, Greer and Besant and Lutnick are all, working their magic behind the scenes. But just from what's already been stated in public, they're essentially just saying we've agreed to reset the clock to April 1st before Liberation Day on April 2nd. So it doesn't seem like, again, what's been put out in public, it doesn't seem like we've made a whole heck of a lot of progress. There have been some kind of minor tweaks, but especially on the China deal, I gotta at least for now reserve judgment because I haven't seen meaningful changes yet.
And by that you mean literally nothing, like static? We're just going back to what it always was? Is that what you mean?
Largely, yes. Again, just going on what we have, which has been what's been put out in public, there really are not many meaningful changes in what has been outlined in this China deal. Honestly, same thing with the UK deal, and even that is really just something that's on paper, but it hasn't been agreed to by either nation yet. There's not a whole lot of change yet. So I have to just reserve judgment to wait and see what they're eventually going to iron out.
Anything you have seen that's meaningful, substantive, that you go, wow, that's going to make a dent or an impact? Has there been any yet, or not really? Nothing?
I mean, honestly, nothing very large. There have been a few things that I say, okay, this will make a dent, for example, in increasing the number of export markets we have for American agricultural products. Okay, so that'll help our American farmers. It'll help increase wages for American farmers, et cetera. But I haven't seen something that's going to, for example, completely reindustrialize the heartland.
Discuss the impact of declining birth rates in China and the United States and their impact as world economic and military superpowers. Birth rates.
This, I think, goes back to an earlier question you had about immigration. Our birth rate has fallen so low in this country that we're at a point we really need more immigration, legal immigration, but we do need more immigration. It's the only way we're going to be able to sustain economic growth, for example.
Jeb Bush famously said once, I always thought it was such a funny line, but he said it, that immigrants are more fertile. Immigrants are more fertile. But I mean, that's kind of what you're saying, that we need immigrants because they make more babies than we do?
Not so much that, as it's just every time you import a person, you're just adding another worker to the economy.
Okay.
Right? But again, this has to coincide with two things: a legal immigration system, right, and a really pared down welfare state. You cannot afford to have people coming here en masse who are all going to just go right on the dole and explode the cost of welfare in this country without adding anything to the productive economic base. You just can't. That can't happen. That is what they've allowed to happen in Europe, and it is destroying a lot of their economies.
What types of incentives would be required to bring manufacturing back for electronics? Do they need to be permanent? What kind of incentives would be required to bring manufacturing back for electronics? And it's so funny. I hear so many times people say things like, and I'll add to electronics. People say, "Well, it's not like we're going to make T-shirts here, Chris. We're not going to build apparel factories here because that's somehow beneath us or whatever." I don't know. I mean, I've heard in China there are factories that people can do the work, but younger kids or their smaller hands. There's this notion that apparel, electronics can't be made here, shouldn't be made here, won't be made here because it's either, again, work we won't do or something else. I don't know. I mean, are you bullish about manufacturing returning, and how much does AI and or robotics play into that conversation too?
I mean, broadly speaking, I'm certainly bullish on manufacturing. Ironically, though, it doesn't really have anything to do with tariffs. And it's not even tax policy, although that is certainly moving in the right direction, especially since probably the most pro-growth part of the big, beautiful bill is that it's going to bring back full expensing. So this is where if I want to, let's say, build a factory for making T-shirts or making computer chips, I don't care what it is, but I want to build a factory here, I need to pay for that factory today. So I should be able to deduct the cost of that factory today. Under the current law, you only get to deduct a small portion of that, and then in some instances, you have to expense it over the next 39 years. Well, 39 years from now, inflation is going to deteriorate the actual value of that deduction so much, it's kind of worthless. Unfortunately, Biden let that provision expire, but this bill would bring it back, and that is going to have a big impact. The biggest impact, though, is actually deregulation. People don't realize, let me give you some context here. The American worker, right, if you're just looking at the cost differential in terms of labor for him and his Chinese counterpart, it really doesn't make sense to outsource to China because the American worker has 3 times as much capital at his fingertips as his Chinese counterpart does. In other words, even though you have to pay him much more than the worker in China, which sometimes is even slave labor, the American worker is so much more productive and so much more efficient that you can still justify the higher wage. Okay, so where's the difference coming from? And even if you consider tax policy, in a lot of instances, that doesn't make it up. It's regulation.
That is a guy that I know that has managed apparel factories for a long time. He and I were talking about this, and again, oversimplifying this, but he said, Chris, when we look at where we're going to make, he was in the business of making jerseys. They're sold at Dick's Sporting Goods or whatever, NFL jerseys. He said, when you're looking at the cost of making these jerseys, it's about bringing in thread and materials from other countries and that regulatory stuff. He said, it's just math. It's simple math. And companies will make it here, but if they can find $100 million savings in the course of a year because it's cheaper to send thread to the Dominican Republic and make them there than it is here, they'll move it to the Dominican Republic. It's that basic, isn't it?
Right. Okay, so...
And companies will even pay more. That's the thing. Companies are not afraid to pay an American worker much more money because mathematically it's still to their benefit if it doesn't cost them so much to do business, regulatory, or bring in goods, right?
Right, exactly. And it's very clear, too, if you have 2 items that are seemingly identical and cost the same, and one is advertised as made in America, it will sell better here. But since you mentioned the math, let's put some math on this. The average worker in manufacturing makes like $50,000 or $60,000 a year, right? The average manufacturer pays a regulatory compliance cost per employee of about $50,000 or $60,000 per year. In other words, you have doubled the cost to employ Americans because of overregulation in this country. That is why we have lost jobs to China. That is why we have hollowed out our industrial base and created the Rust Belt. The math is so crystal clear on this. And again, this is why I am bullish on manufacturing. This administration is taking, not a scalpel, a machete to the regulatory state. I had dinner with Doug Burgum, our Secretary of the Interior, back back in March, or excuse me, April? Yeah, beginning April, I think it was. And one of the things we talked about was all the permitting reform that they've been doing. And the big, beautiful bill, by the way, builds on that. They have even more permitting reform built in there. But the stuff that they didn't need legislation for, that they were able to just do on the executive side, they have taken some permits that used to take 2 whole years for energy. They've taken that down to a little more than 2 weeks. I mean, you want to talk about stifling innovation and crushing investment in this country. Add an extra 2 years onto the cost of any project, that'll do it. As they do away with all those things, though, it is a massive reduction in that regulatory compliance cost, and that will help to bring back manufacturing and jobs to this country.
You kind of already told me that you didn't think there was much impact, really, that you see anyway, but somebody said, will Trump's tariffs be a good thing once the dust settles, and will it be a good source of additional revenue? We reminded ourselves that pre-IRS, this country did fund itself through tariffs. That used to be the country's income, was tariffs. It's been replaced with the IRS and our tax code. Will we see meaningful revenue from tariffs, in your view?
I mean, meaningful in the sense of a percentage of all revenue, probably not. Right? We were funding the government exclusively with tariffs at a time when the government only spent about 2 or 3% of the national income. Today, it spends north of 20%. So if you're going to go back to funding the government exclusively by tariffs, you not only have to really increase the tax base, the amount of international trade that you're going to tax, but you also have to, just dramatically increase the tax rate. And those two things just don't go together.
This is such a huge question, but kind of while we're on it, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, we all know, we know the debt, $37 trillion and growing. In our lifetimes, are we going to see it just collapse on itself if we don't change course? There's obviously not a political will to really address it. And I think both parties have shown it's just third-rail politics they don't want to touch. But is there going to be a point of no return where we just as a country collectively, regardless of your party, are just not, we can't do it? Are we already there?
Okay, well, in terms of that last one, that's the easy one to answer because it's a cop-out. We don't know. The problem with that point of no return, Chris, is that it has proven different for different countries in different places around the world at different times, right? If you look at Greece, if you look at Weimar Germany in the 1920s, right, you can find countless examples of countries that went down this route of getting themselves into the downward debt spiral, and wherever that point of no return was, it just differed. It differs pretty dramatically, actually. And none of those countries had what we have, which is the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. So that's a bit of a superpower that, I guess gives us a little bit of an extra cushion. So I hesitate to say that we are at that point of no return. That being said, you do get there eventually. And at some point, your momentum does just take you over the falls. And if we could roll back the clock to 2019, I would say, there's a good chance we can just simply grow our way out of this mess. In other words, sure, the debt keeps growing, but GDP grows so much faster that it's kind of like if a household continues to get into credit card debt, but their income is growing so much faster than the credit card debt, it's a non-issue. You can eventually pay it off. We're not at that point today. We need not only very fast growth, but we need spending cuts if we ever hope to get this thing under control.
So you absolutely cannot just grow our way out of this?
You can't. You would literally need economic growth of 7% per annum for years in order to actually grow your way out of this. And if you look back at Ronald Reagan, he achieved double-digit growth of, I think, like 12% or something, but he achieved that for a year and a half. And then growth settled down to the single digits, 4 or 5%, 3% sometimes, which were still good growth numbers, but they're not 7%. It would take nothing short of an economic miracle on steroids to achieve 7% growth continuously.
Gold. It's advertised a lot. I have them as an advertiser. Somebody asked, would it be beneficial to return to the gold standard? If so, How would that be accomplished? What is your opinion of kind of commodities, precious metals, the gold standard, that sort of thing?
I mean, this looks like liquid gold. But I'm a huge advocate of the gold standard, chiefly because it prevents the government from conducting the kind of monetization of debt that we have seen for the last 4 years. In other words, devaluing the dollar to rob you of your purchasing power, to rob you of your savings, to rob you of your income, right? People forget that a dollar is actually a weight, right? It's a weight of gold. That's what the dollar originally meant. Now, clearly it doesn't today, but a dollar used to be a weight like ounces or pounds. I mean, that's where the British pound got its name, a pound of sterling silver, right? So it would definitely be beneficial, but the problem is if you're going to actually return to a gold standard, you have to get federal finance in order first.
Digital currency, what's its role while we're at it? When you're talking about things like, it's still beyond me getting my head wrapped around digital currency, Bitcoin, that sort of thing. Where do you come down on that?
So we want to distinguish between a digital currency and a digitized currency. We already have a digitized currency. That's where I take my credit card when I go to check out at the grocery store, and I just tap the credit card on the cash register, right? And a bunch of ones and zeros move between my bank account and the grocery store, and the funds are transferred. That's just digitized currency or a digital transaction. But that's very different from a digital currency. A digital currency would be something like Bitcoin or a stable coin or a CBDC, the latter of which is horrible. It's kind of like the government-run version of a crypto coin, and like the government-run version of anything, it's terrible. We got to be very, very careful about any movements to digital currencies because of all the potential pitfalls that come with them, not the least of which is the government's ability to surveil your money.
Those are all like mini economies, aren't they? Is that an easy way to think of that? Like every one of those cryptocurrencies are their own kind of ecosystem economy?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. Let's see.
Now, Chris, in that pile, do you have any questions?
Well, I mean, a couple. These are easy, though. What's my favorite cigar?
I'll tell you what, before you answer that,
Yeah.
I'm going to go run and take a break.
Atta kid. All right, your turn. Fair enough. My favorite cigar is the San Cristobal Quintessence. Hello. Here's another question. How is national broadcast versus local broadcast, and which do you like better? That is tough because the national broadcast pays me a lot more. I'm kidding. You know what? It has been something that I've aspired to do my entire career, is have a national show and be a part of a national radio broadcast. And the privilege and the blessing in that is that I get to talk with people that I would never get to speak with from places all over the country. I mean, Fast Eddie, you know this, we get calls every day from Maine to Washington State, Florida, Texas, Minnesota. We talk to people in all corners of the country, and that is the coolest perspective, and I love that. But it's also, I have always loved and I have always adored being able to talk to people that are next door to us and down the street from us. And, you know, when you wake up and you can talk about the weather or a storm that rolled through, there's an intimacy to that. I mean, quite frankly, you're all here because I've been doing radio in Philadelphia for 14 years, more or less. And it's a blessing, and I will never get to know people like I've gotten to know you the way, if we're blessed enough to do this for a long time, you'll never get to know people quite like we get to know each other here. And so that's what I say I kind of miss about local radio, I can already say. Is that about right, Ed? Yeah. Yeah, come up here for a second. Why don't you answer that, because you talk to the people every day. What do you think is the difference now that we've gone nationally syndicated? Now, here's one thing I know. I know what a lot of you say, and this is just part of the business, unfortunately. Yes, there are more commercials, but I warned you about that already. That's just the nature of it. But what do you think's different?
It's definitely harder to book guests at that time of day. No, just kidding.
Harder?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. No, it's strange because you do see a perspective, like someone from California who calls the show has a very different attitude than someone from Pennsylvania or someone from New Jersey. So what's been very different is kind of actually seeing the perspective of, someone out west who is not really for life or anything like that and does have a problem with some of the things that Trump does. It's very strange because we've gotten, to know an audience for so long, and now it's just like, wait, where is this coming from? Where's this person coming from? So it's different. I can't really explain it. Yeah.
Trump has built a coalition across political boundaries. What steps must we take to ensure this finding of common ground continues in a new administration? I don't know. I feel like this is the first time I'm starting to see some sniping inside MAGA. This is more of a political question than an economic one, but I think Trump is the most rare of all rare birds. I don't know that there will ever be another one like him. Do you see anyone in this cabinet, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio? I don't know who. I'm just naming names for the sake of naming names. I don't have a horse. But will we ever live through something like this again? This feels, maybe you can talk about it economically. Are we living through something, history will study this guy. I mean, as volatile as it is and the haters and all of that, 40, 50 years from now, will people go, this guy was something unbelievable, a force that really did something radically different in the country?
I think so. He reminds me, and I said this before he won the second term, I said he reminds me a lot of Grover Cleveland, who presided over the destruction of the then Democrat Party. And I think Trump might be doing the same thing today for the Republican Party, and not in a bad way. For Cleveland, he was, before Trump, he was the only president elected to non-consecutive terms. And Cleveland was a staunch advocate for sound money. In other words, not allowing the government to simply inflate away the value of debt. Gee, does that sound familiar? He was a very rare Democrat at the time after the Civil War because he was not he was not for slavery. He was not for Jim Crow laws, et cetera, something which was a part of the Democrat Party at the time. And so he really kind of split the party. He challenged all of the orthodoxies of the time, and he put together this really bizarre coalition that ended up redefining what it meant to be a Republican and then what it meant to be a Democrat. And I think we're actually living through the exact same moment today. It's obviously hard to tell when you're in the moment. It's really hard to be objective, but that's just what it feels like to me. That's what my instinct kind of says today. And so what Trump is doing is really realigning the political spectrum. He's great at asking questions you're not allowed to ask. Why are we in NATO? Trump asks. I mean, NATO was created for three things: to keep the Soviets out of Europe, to keep us in, and to keep Germany down. We don't need to keep Germany down. They have two nuclear neighbors, Britain and France. Don't have to worry about Germany anymore. The Soviet Union doesn't exist. We don't have to worry about keeping them out. And why should we be in Europe? Now, I'm not saying there are no answers to those questions. There may be. That's not my point. My point is that has been the thinking for literally 80 years. And now Trump comes in and says, wait, why do we still think this? Just like he's doing with tariffs, just like he's doing with the Middle East. When he challenges, wait, do we really need to do X, Y, and Z just because Israel says it? Do we really need to do A, B, and C just because Iran says don't do it, right? Again, I'm not saying one side is right or the other side is wrong. I'm just saying Trump is a great disruptor. He's coming in and he's asking questions that for a very long time you weren't allowed to ask. And as he does that, he, I think, is realigning both political parties, and some of what appear to be fractures in the MAGA movement that you're talking about have really been exposed just the last few months, some of which have been just the last 72 hours. I mean, look at how guys like Mark Levin have basically turned on him, right? It really is amazing to see how he is reorienting and reprioritizing the Republican Party.
I am of the position on Donald Trump, and you know this if you've been a regular listener. I said this during the primary. It's not about being against anyone else, but in my view, if a man is willing to have his home raided and be dragged through multiple courts of law, his fortune, his family violated, and ultimately even maybe lose his life, not once but a couple of times, and still wants the job, he's earned my trust until he proves me wrong. That's my impression on Donald Trump. And that doesn't mean he's not going to get it wrong, and it doesn't mean I'm not going to be critical, but right now I trust the guy, and so far I haven't been proven wrong. First of all, Mr. Antoni, thank you very much for this evening. Thank you very much for all that you do.
Thank you.
E.J., Eddie's kind of joking, but here's a little dirty secret about the time of day we function. It is very, very difficult to get people to wake up and come on a show live and talk with us at the time of day we do. It's easy to get somebody to come on at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Very hard to get somebody to wake up and get dressed and talk to me at 7 in the morning. And E.J. not only is willing to do that, but he has some of the finest brain power in the country. It's why Heritage recognized it. It's why other shows recognize it. And in due course, he'll stop taking my calls because he'll be on Fox all the time. I'm kidding. But we love you, E.J. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seriously, thank you, Chris.
I want to thank the good people of the Cigar Republic, Paul and the brothers who run this joint every single day and make it great. This is a beautiful facility, and the Cigar Republic have been tremendous hosts and friends and sponsors of ours now for 3 years running or more. Atlantic Cigar, their parent company. If you're going to order cigars, I hope you'll consider Atlantic Cigar. I want to, most of all, I want to thank my radio family here. Not just those of you that listen, but most of them are here tonight. Our general manager is named Lorenzo Caldera. Lorenzo, are you here still? Where are you? There he is back there. And it's Lorenzo. Lorenzo is the reason that we're even here, because there was a time when I wasn't even sure if I was going to have a job in the business anymore, and Lorenzo opened the door here at Philadelphia's AM990 The Answer and gave me one. And that led to where we are today, and I will forever be grateful to him. I want to thank our program director, Steve Ardolina, who is here, I believe, still. Steve-O, thank you so much for everything that you do each and every day to make the radio station sound great. Greg is our new our engineer who's here. Greg, great to see you. Thank you for making everything run. Doug Schaub, who's our production director, he's the guy that makes all the stuff in between the commercials and all the sound effects and all that stuff. He's been doing it a number of years, and Doug's here, and we love you. Ann, our promotions director, and Victoria is here. I know I'm going to forget people. Heather Eichelberger, who set up a lot of today. Frank Calderera, who's a tremendous friend and one of our account executives. These are just fine people. And I will tell you that beyond anything else, nothing matters more to me than the fact that most everyone that I can think of that I've just named, that I call colleagues and friends, they're all people who have a deep, abiding faith in the Lord. And this company that is my employer, that's their mission first. They truly wake up every day and they believe. They're believers, and they prioritize that, and they lead their business that way. And so mission is their focus. Doing good with these microphones is their focus. I've never worked for anybody like that. And so as I find myself getting a little closer in my own relationship, it is a blessing to be able to talk about it. But I cannot thank all of you enough for being as kind and in the way in which you've embraced me, my family, this radio station, friends like E.J. It is a blessing, and it is something that I get emotional about it, because I truly, I say it a lot, and I know it sounds pat. It blows my mind that I'm given the privilege to do it every day, and it is never lost on me that it is you that have allowed us to do it. And so this has been an intense 6 months. We've worked awfully hard to get to where we are, Eddie and I. And you sit in a room and you grind it out every day, and you forget until great nights like tonight when you get to come out, shake some hands, and say hello. So very sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, from Eddie, from all of us at Salem and Philadelphia's AM990 The Answer, thank you for your support. We love you. Thank you for coming. Good night, everybody.